Namaskar, Adab and welcome. I'm Aditya and you're watching The Indian Atheist. Today we'll be looking at how belief in God or faith is commonly categorized. The classification attempted here is mainly from the Western perspective, and it's going to be rather sparse on details because there's obviously a whole lot more to faith than one can possibly hope to cover in 10 minutes. I've therefore included in the description box what I think are really credible sources of information on the topics covered in this video. Please feel free to consult them. I personally found the articles in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy especially well written and engaging. I should also add on the outset that any attempt to classify faith is bound to appear somewhat juvenile at the end of the day, because faith, by its very nature, doesn't admit an easy codification because it's not a precise thing, and to every human being, his or her faith is deeply personal and therefore unique. It wouldn't be wrong, I think, to say that there are exactly as many distinct types of religious faith as the number of human beings who ever breathed. The only common thread you'll find in all faiths, however, is that there's always, without exception, an explicit suspension of reason at some point, which is why believers will often point out that there's a reason it's called faith. Well, on that at the very least, we are in complete agreement. So, on to the business of the day. Theism is as good a point as any to begin with. For now, let us stipulate that God is an omnipresent, omniscient, and omnipotent entity, ubiquitous, all-knowing, and all-powerful, these being the three standard godly attributes. There's also a fourth one, omnibenevolence, or just benevolence, the perfect goodness of God, but even a cursory reading of most religious scriptures will suffice to establish that for the most part, gods are just as malevolent as they are benevolent, and when a god is benevolent, he or she or it is only selectively benevolent, and furthermore, it always comes at a terrible cost, unquestioning loyalty and total lifelong commitment, or else, eventually, you're gonna get caught. If we are being honest, the gods of scriptures appear to be more like an international body of hardened criminals with a strict and ruthless behavioral code. If that sounds a lot like mafia, that's because it is actually the definition of mafia. So please, let's be real here. Benevolence is not what gods are known for. Anyway, a theist is someone who believes in the God hypothesis, that there exists an entity with the godly attributes. The theist believes that this God character is also additionally the creator of the universe, and that not only did God create or design the universe, but that he or she or it also runs the whole universe in a sort of regulatory capacity, including faraway galaxies and supernovae and black holes and comets, right down to molecules and atoms and electrons and Higgs bosons and everything in between. Running the universe also consists, somewhat surprisingly, supervising every act of every living being and every thought that passes through every sentient being's mind on a random speck of a planet called Earth, and also keeping a record of these acts and thoughts and punishing or rewarding them according to a set of rules neatly laid down in a book or a series of books, which again are only to be found on this totally random planet called Earth, which, forget the whole universe, even our own tiny little galaxy doesn't seem to give two fucks about. The theist is thus a complete package. He believes not only in the creator God, but also the supervisor God, and by extension, he also believes in religion, the aforementioned set of rules given by God. He takes these rules rather seriously, at least when it's convenient, especially when it's convenient, and wishes for everyone to follow suit, for their own good, of course. Now, theism may be the definitive type of belief in the three great monotheistic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but it's not the only type of belief. Consider, for instance, deism. The deist believes that there exists a God of the three godly attributes fame, and that he or she or it created the universe, but then the deist believes that he or she or it stepped back, and ever since then, for roughly about 14 billion years, he or she or it is just sitting there in a torpid state, observing things. To what end? No one knows. Okay, I'm gonna go with he now, because let's face it, it's gotta be a he. Testosterone, don't lie, okay? The gratuitous abandon and the sheer wastefulness of the Big Bang and the apathetic majesty of the universe that it birthed, that's got dick written all over it, right? Anywho, I digress. The point is, for a deist, God doesn't involve himself with the working of the universe anymore. So if you're a deist, a bit of good news, he ain't interested in your browser history because he don't give a fuck. So serve like a champ. Boldly go where no one has gone before. You know what I mean. Deism in the West seems to have arisen at least partly out of the need felt by the 17th century Enlightenment thinkers to distance themselves from the embarrassment that inevitably follows from a rigid faith in the literal truth of revelation, and one that began to bite more and more as the scientific revolution progressed. So the thinkers of the day, instead of basing their faith on the scriptures, tried in vain to support it with arguments premised either on natural philosophy, that is from the observation of the world, or on pure reason, leading to the so-called ontological arguments, which the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant then famously made short work of in his epoch-making magnum opus Critique of Pure Reason. But more to the point, the thinkers of early modernity were spot on in their assessment that God was in dire need of saving from the scriptures. To that end, they postulated that there was an original, good, natural, pure, rational religion that was later corrupted by a few unscrupulous priests for their selfish interests. This theory didn't hold so well, though, because this priestly class of people, unscrupulous or not, was quite powerful back in the day. It kind of still is where I come from. And more importantly, later investigations into the origin of religions pointed less and less to conformity with the natural world of reason, and more to emotions like fear and loyalty and hostility. A classic sign of shallow anthropocentrism, the toxic notion of human supremacy. The priests didn't corrupt originally pure religions, not that they wouldn't have if they could, but no, they simply invented religions that were corrupt from the get-go. Deism was perhaps the first blow to theism in the West, the blow that came from within its own ranks, but having done its fair share of damage to the virtual monopoly of the theist doctrines prevalent in the West, its appeal seems to have died over the course of time to give way to several new ways of thinking about God. Enter the pantheist. Pantheism, in a nutshell, is a view that God is all that is. Everyone and everything around you, the whole universe, is God. In the age of the smartphone, this is, I think, the most common type of belief in the world. With science and reason hot on his trail, God is apparently tired of hiding in the scriptures, so now he's taken to hiding in plain sight. After all, where do you go when you're on the run and there's nowhere else left to go? Simple. You make them think you're everywhere all at once. God goes guerrilla. Smart move. No wonder then that the God of pantheism is quite shoddily defined. He is not necessarily the one with all the godly attributes, nor is he necessarily the overseer of earthly affairs anymore. No one really knows what's up with this God. The divine powers are now severely diminished to the point that an egotist churg such as myself might be tempted to say something to the effect of, "Hey God, we don't really need you. Take a hint for once, now beat it." That's what pantheism has reduced God to. It's not me, okay? I'm just saying. Mafia Don, not very good at looking after his own. You never hear from him, he's everywhere but nowhere to be seen. The optics are not very good, okay? People are gonna talk. I don't know, but pantheism seems like a very peculiar position, characterized by rampant ambiguity with regard to the nature of God and religion. Take any two pantheists and the chances that they'll agree on any theological question are really slim. The ambiguity itself is, I think, a design feature rather than an accidental one, because it makes it possible for people of very diverse faiths to identify as pantheists. Indeed, the Stanford Encyclopedia states that pantheism should not be taken as a single codifiable position, but rather as a diverse family of distinct doctrines. What most pantheists do seem to agree on, though, is that God most definitely cannot be personal. That is, God is not as invested in you personally as you are in him. He is instead an impersonal force with zero stakes in your past, present, or future. It may be argued that this puts God at an even higher pedestal than most theists or deists do. This is a God with one hell of a nonchalant attitude and with a cop-out for almost every responsibility under the sun. Praying to him doesn't work, for instance, because A, he doesn't give a fuck, and B, he's powerless as fuck anyway. Another little piece of detail that most pantheists also seem to agree on is that God is immanent, that is, God pervades, and if you really look hard enough, is reportedly revealed in the material world. This immanent God of pantheism is further elevated to even greater godliness in the transcendent God of panentheism. To a panentheist, God is all that is, and more. God is identical with the universe, while also simultaneously transcending the material realm. I'm not even going to try to wrap my head around that because it's quite pointless to do so for obvious reasons. Human intuition and thought process are themselves eminently material phenomena when you go down to the level of neurons and synapses and chemical neurotransmitters and whatnot, and therefore fundamentally incapable of granting any access whatsoever to even a semblance of the knowledge of the transcendent, what Kant called the noumenal world. Nevertheless, pantheistic and panentheistic elements appear in some or the other denomination of almost every religion, including the monotheistic ones and very prominently in the polytheistic ones like Hinduism, as well as in some alternative traditions like Sufism. Due to its ostensibly inclusive outlook, there's been a profusion of pantheistic ideas in the popular culture as well. The Nafia people in James Cameron's Avatar, for instance, are mucho pantheistic or panentheistic. I can never tell the difference. There's also the associated notions of pandeism and panendeism, potato, but a lot more interesting is something totally bizarre called process theism, which sort of puts the three old omni-godly attributes on hold and instead, out of the blue, runs off on a tangent challenging the three additional godly attributes of being eternal or non-temporal, immutable or unchangeable, and impassible or unaffected by the universe. One thus speaks of utter nonsense like the relational, persuasive powers of God as opposed to the unilateral, coercive control he previously enjoyed. One also speaks of God as the great companion, the fellow sufferer who understands, which confuses me. Like, what is he, a shrink now? What a sore fucking loser, right? You probably haven't heard of process theology yet because it has only recently hit the market of pompous and pedantic philosophy wannabes. But give it another solid 50 years or so and I think it'll catch on in a big way because the bullshit potential there is quite high. I mean, not as high as the Jungian mythological archetypes like Jordan Peterson microorgasms at the mere mention of, but certainly there's enough bullshit in there to warrant one too many calls to Carl Sagan's baloney detection kit. Finally, in fairness, it must be said that in many ways, especially in its firm renouncement of the personal God, and in its somewhat questionable appropriation of diverse doctrines from equally diverse faiths, the modern pantheistic movement and its derivatives such as Unitarian Universalism may be seen as weak rejections or at least major subversions of the conventional Western monotheistic notion of God and religion. So much so that several noted pantheists, much to their chagrin, were described as atheists up until the last century. A few centuries before that, that title went to the deists. Before that, it was the polytheists and pagans, and I guess pretty much anyone who wasn't, white. One of the little things I love about the 21st century is that now only atheists are described as atheists, and for that we are grateful. The flip side though is that atheists are only described as atheists. Something needs to be done about that, because surely we are more than that. We are, after all, the most well-informed and therefore quite simply the best skeptics in the history of humanity, and even better ones follow in our wake. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Dhanyavad, Shukriya.